Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Dynasty Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined today for the trade block by Pat Fitzmaurice. Fitz, how you doing, buddy?
Doing well, Ryan. The combine whet my appetite for football, and we have started the run-up to the draft. Kind of a long runway. We still got about 50 days to go, but, man, I love it. Draft season, Dynasty, rookie draft season, well, at least scouting season. Great time of year, man.
Do you feel like draft season for rookies starts January 1st? Do you feel like it starts at the Senior Bowl? Do you feel like it starts after Combine? When for you does it feel like that calendar really does kind of flip to that time of year?
Oh, I mean, it's the new year is great. I mean, getting that last little taste of guys in the bowl, and Senior Bowl, it's fun to get the reports, but no one can really see what's going on. There are no concrete results like you get at the Combine. I think the Combine is sort of the official start of prospecting season for the Dynasty community. That's when things start to crystallize a little bit. We can start to speculate on landing spots and everything like that. So I think the Combine is kind of the official kickoff of Dynasty rookie season.
Let's dive into our show today. We're going to be talking, as we always do on the trade block, through our Dynasty trade value chart, which does update on the first or close to the first of every single month all year long. So we're looking at our March update here. We're going to go through each position, kind of talk a little bit about some of the movers and guys who are going up and who are going down. And then we'll get into questions in the second half of the show from you guys on Discord. So be sure to drop those questions either in the chat or to raise your hand. We'll bring you up on stage with us in the second half of the episode. Fitz, we usually start with going through quarterback, running back, wide receiver, then tight end in that order. I actually want to start with not one of those positions, but with some of our values that we've assigned in this trade value chart to just the Dynasty rookie draft picks. Because in looking at it, I thought it was really interesting in Superflex that the sort of value we've assigned to the 101 is 71, then 102 is 67, then 103 is 60. So the second pick in rookie drafts is currently valued as closer to the first pick than to the third pick. I've kind of, just from a macro level, been thinking about this class as there is a gap between Genty at 101 and everybody else. These values would seem to suggest that whoever that second pick is, whether it's your quarterback of choice, if that's what you need in Superflex, or maybe Tet McMillan, if you want to throw somebody else out there, maybe, I know you're a big Marion Hampton guy, whoever that is, this value chart would seem to suggest that it's closer to the first pick than the third. Is that something you agree with?
I don't think so. We might need to tweak that a little and grade it down. I do think there's maybe a little bit of a drop-off between Ashton Genty and everyone else. So especially since, I don't know, maybe there was the thought that one of these quarterbacks would emerge as like a consensus number one. And I guess Cam Ward is a consensus number one, but I still think he's far from foolproof. So I do think Genty is still... I agree with you that 102 should probably be closer to 103 in value than to 101.
Okay, because I definitely agree with that. And I assume the same in one quarterback leagues, because if you look at our one quarterback column in this same chart, then it's the 101 is valued at 71, 102 at 63, 103 at 53. So still a little bit closer to the 101, but more of basically a similar gap between the 1 and the 2, and then the 2 and the 3. Would you kind of have the same answer looking at it from a non-Superflex perspective?
Yeah, I would. I mean, especially in Superflex. Although I don't know. I mean, there are various opinions on this where I'm like, I've been mainlining NFL draft podcasts lately, the ones that are not just Dynasty, but actual NFL drafts. So people like Daniel Jeremiah, Todd McShay. I know McShay thinks Marion Hampton is like right on the doorstep with Ashton Genty. In terms, he doesn't see much separation between the two at all. He loves Marion Hampton. So if you would ask him, he might think the one QB gap between 101 and 102 is too wide. But
we talked a bit with Bogman about, I think I made the comparison of Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors, where everybody had the very much consensus, like, it's indisputable Harrison number one. I mean, there were some people who disputed it, but like in general, most people viewed it as a very clear one and a very clear two, but that I thought the gap between those two was somewhat overstated. And I'm not saying that these guys are those same players. Obviously, we have a year of NFL data now to evaluate Neighbors and Harrison. But I think in terms of where we stood a year ago, I wonder if it's similar where Genty is the guy, but I don't know if maybe the gap is as wide as the obviousness of who 101 is might suggest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. But then again, there is not much. Well, Genty's the consensus number one. After that, really not a lot of consensus on everything or anything with these running backs. I know that on the staff, Derek Brown does not have Omarion Hampton as his RB2. I think he's got Hampton as his RB4 in this class. So he certainly wouldn't think that Hampton is right on the bumper of Ashton Genty. But yeah, we'll see. And I don't know. Like, I've been trying to parse between Quinshon Judkins and Caleb Johnson. That's at running back 4. I have Genty, Hampton, Travion Henderson as my top 3. To me, Judkins versus Caleb Johnson is a coin flip, basically.
So since we're already talking about the running backs, we'll circle back to the quarterbacks afterwards. Let's just continue with the running back conversation. Henderson and Caleb Johnson are back-to-back in that section of the Dynasty trade value chart. Henderson is the 15th most valuable running back. Caleb Johnson, 16th. A very small gap between them, but there is a gap. Hampton is up at 12. He's just slightly ahead of Henderson. Obviously, Genty, we know, is very high. He's RB3. I think that's somewhat close to consensus. I mean, maybe if you're a win now team, you'd rather have Saquon than him, but it's pretty much Bijan, Gibbs, and Genty in most places you look. But it's the same group of that like top 4 or 5. Judkins is just a couple spots behind Caleb Johnson, but in terms of the actual value we're assigning, it's like a point difference. So it very easily could be Henderson, Caleb Johnson, Judkins back to back to back, even in these rankings. All of those guys are in the top half of RB2 range. Besides guys who are even higher. There's nobody who's like several spots down. There's almost like we're missing the rookies who are in the range of like RB20 to RB32 in the Dynasty rankings. It's either we think you're one of the top 18 guys at the position already before even knowing landing spots, or it's you're taking a flyer and seeing where they go. I know we talk a lot about this being such a deep class at the position. I know you've made the point that you saw somebody make on Twitter of it essentially being 2 running back classes combined into 1 year. But that depth, like I said, there's not a lot in that like RB2, RB3 range. It pretty much falls off after Judkins at RB18, at least in our value chart.
That gap might change and it might narrow after the draft, where once we see where some of these guys go, I think it's just easy to group that big 5 of Genty, Hampton, Henderson, Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Judkins together because, well, I mean, for one thing, I know that people spent the fall trying to decide which of the Ohio State running backs they liked more between Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. I know that in Daniel Jeremiah's latest mock, he had Genty, Hampton, and Henderson going within 3 or 4 picks of each other. I think from the Steelers taking Genty at 21 to the Vikings taking Henderson at 24. And I think he had Hampton going to the Chargers at 22. So, yeah, like it's hard to sort out those 5. And maybe in reality, there's not that big a gap between the top 5 and the next group. The, RJ Harvey, Devin Neal, Dylan Sampson, Bashal Tutins, and that big 5. I guess we'll find out when we see where these guys go in the draft. And I mean, heck, if any of these guys wind up going in the second round, if we do see Bashal Tutin go in the second round, or Dylan Sampson, or Ollie Gordon, these guys are going to move up the draft board of dynasty managers for the rookie drafts.
When you're thinking, this is my last question on the rookies at this position. When you're thinking about landing spots for the running backs and places where they might gain a lot of value in your eyes or possibly lose value in your eyes, depending on where they go. I think the places where they can make an immediate impact are fairly obvious. We've talked about like the Chargers, the Cowboys. These are some of our favorite landing spots for guys. I want to throw out a team that there could be an opening a year from now. It's kind of what we did with Trey Benson in rookie drafts last year, saying you sit on him for a year and then James Conner is gone and you're sitting pretty. It didn't pan out that way. So if somebody like, let's say Dylan Sampson, who is a player that I like, let's say he goes in, I don't know, the third round to the Ravens as we'll have Derrick Henry another year, but then after that, he's the guy who steps into this awesome role. And I'm just using the Ravens as an example because Derrick Henry is one of the oldest running backs in football. But there are other teams that this could apply to. In a situation like that, how would you evaluate just pure value, not even where you're drafting them in your rookie drafts, but on a chart like this? How would you rank somebody like a Dylan Sampson if you were drafted in that scenario where this year it's not going to be worth really anything barring an injury, but the opportunity, the runway is so good for after 2025?
It's an interesting question, Worm. I think it would still be a downgrade, and I think most dynasty managers would agree with me, even though there is potential to take over in 2026. I do think most dynasty managers would not want to see that landing spot and basically have it be a redshirt year for that guy.
By now, most of you have probably heard of Reality Sports Online, the powerful fantasy sports platform where owners get to build and manage their fantasy team like an NFL general manager. But the question is, have you tried it? It's time to go see what all the buzz in the Dynasty community is about. Free agency, multi-year contracts, a rookie draft, multi-team trades, franchise tags, contract extensions, first-round rookie options, automated contract and salary cap functionality, and much, much more. Think it sounds complicated? It's not. The best thing about Reality Sports Online Fantasy Front Office is that it doesn't take any more time than a standard league. It just requires more strategy. Think you're among the fantasy elite? Well, this is the platform to test your mettle. Still not sure? You can test out your general manager skills for free in a mock free agency auction. If you like what you see, use promo code FantasyPros to receive a 10% discount on your team or league today. That's promo code FantasyPros to receive a 10% discount on your team or league today. Fantasy just got real at realitysportsonline.com. Quickly, Fitz, before we move off the running backs, is there any non-rookie that you think is worth hitting on? I mean, a lot of these guys, it's not like anything has really changed between last month and now for most of them. Is there anybody at all on this list at the position that stands out before we move on to a different position? Or is it really just once you're done talking about the rookies, there's not as much to say?
Yeah, I don't think there's much to say about any of these guys. I don't think we saw major value changes to any of the vets. I know J.K. Dobbins took a little bit of a hit. I think just we kind of adjusted down with some of the veterans, and I think it's the realization that this running back class, with the kind of testing numbers they put up at the combine, just really underscores how sensational this running back class is. And I think that means a downgrade for some of the vets. And we talked about this. Debro and I were on a show with our friends at Player Profile, Matt Kelly and Theo Greminger. And like, if you are their older running backs and even some younger number 2 type running backs who were drafted in the last couple of years, their roster spots are going to be in jeopardy. This running back class is a big retirement party for a lot of people. These guys are bringing their gold watches because they are going to replace some people on NFL rosters. And you got to think the market's going to be soft for the free agent running backs, guys like J.K. Dobbins, who has that worrisome injury history. Who is going to pay J.K. Dobbins when you can go out and find a good running back in the 5th round of this year's draft?
After last offseason, everybody's like, oh, running backs are back. Everybody now knows the value in drafting or in signing a veteran. Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. Not this year. It will not be. A, you don't always have guys of that talent caliber out there available. And B, just the sheer fact that there are so many talented guys coming in is really going to change things. Are you, because of this running back class, looking to trade for like late 2nd round rookie picks or 3rd round rookie draft picks?
I don't know if the 2nd or 3rd round has any more value than it would in a different year. Overall, Worm, I think this class is still weaker than last year's class because it's not that great a wide receiver class. So while I'm more inclined to take a running back in the second or third round than I would be most other years, I think there's a very good chance that that's how I'm going to be spending second and third round picks. I don't necessarily know that I am that much more motivated to move into the second and third round just because of the running back class. You know what I mean? Just the overall class, I think, is a drop off from last year, even if it's a very different texture to this class with the strength at running back and tight end and the weakness at quarterback and wide receiver, which is where last year's class was so exceptional.
Let's jump into the quarterbacks in our trade value chart here. I'm not going to ask you about Sanders or Ward because we've talked a ton about them pretty much on every episode of this, every episode with Bogman. I just feel like anytime we're talking quarterbacks, we've talked a lot about them. I do want to ask about a different rookie, Jackson Dart. There does seem to be more and more rumblings about him as a potential first-round pick in the NFL draft, somebody who has an intriguing skill set for fantasy managers. He's now inside our top 32 at the position. Previously, we'd only had 2 incoming rookies who are valued there in our Dynasty trade value chart. He's now at QB 27. And if he's a first-round pick this year, maybe that even goes up a little, depending on what we see with some of these other names. Where is he for you? Like I said, he's QB 27 on the trade value chart. He's sandwiched between Sam Darnold and Justin Fields. Do you agree with that? Is that too high, too low, just right?
Yeah, I too have him at QB 27, sandwiched between Sam Darnold and Justin Fields. Dart's kind of that firewall between maybe the solid starters, and I do think we have to consider Darnold a solid starter because someone is going to sign him to be their starting quarterback. I don't think it's going to be Minnesota. I think he's going to be the solution for one of Giants, Jets, Raiders, Browns, one of these quarterback-needy teams, Steelers. And then behind Dart, you've got Fields, Smith, Stafford, Derek Carr, Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, older players, or Fields, who's kind of in limbo as a younger player who may or may not have an assured job in the next year or two. So, yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense to put Dart in sort of that purgatory spot. Debro loves him. Debro thinks he should be a top 15 pick in the draft. I'm not as sure about it. I've heard other people say that maybe Tyler Shuck is the QB3 in this class. I don't know about that. I've heard other people say that maybe Quinn Ewers should be the QB3 in this class. I definitely don't know about that. I think that's insanity. So, yeah, it's the tale with Jackson Dart and his dynasty value worm is going to be told with where he lands in this year's draft. If he's a first-round
pick. What's your confidence?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, what's your confidence level that there is a third quarterback taken in the first round? Like, scale of 1 to 10, how sure would you be to make that bet?
Man, I think it's 50-50. I'm working on a mock draft article right now, and I do not have a third quarterback in the first round.
Yeah. Debro's conviction on Dart somewhat sways me because he's been right the last couple of years on the guys he's gone out on a limb for. And I obviously have a lot of trust in our friend and colleague who will be on the Dynasty podcast later this week, reacting to the Combine. So everybody should check that out with Fitz, Buggs, and Debro. My assumption this whole draft season so far has been it would just be 2 in the first round. Still a ways to go to see if that becomes kind of more crystallized in the coming weeks. As far as the non-rookies go, we always spend a lot of time at the top, and I don't think we really need to talk about anybody there. At this point, we've talked about the big names enough. I want to ask you, there's 2 guys who are back-to-back, and really they're valued the same way by our numerically values. There's actually 4 in a row that all are kind of tied. I want to ask about 2 of them. It's Dak Prescott at QB 22, Anthony Richardson at QB 23, Bryce Young at QB 24, Tua Tagovailoa at QB 25. All have the same numerical value assigned in this chart. The 2 most interesting ones here, I believe, are Richardson and Young. Do you think it's right to have them basically dead even? This is Bryce Young basically staying where he was, Anthony Richardson moving down significantly to make them even. Or do you think one of them should be, even if it's not a huge gap, valued ahead of the other? Because obviously a year ago there was a tremendous gap between these two.
Yeah, I've moved Young ahead of Richardson, Worm. And here my hang up with Richardson is this. Like, you always knew it was going to be kind of that Richardson was going to be a project. And I thought the Colts were sort of committed to his development. But, man, we've just gotten such mixed signals from the Colts. They got impatient with Richardson early last year, benched him for Joe Flacco, even though you know Joe Flacco is eventually going to cost you with his interceptions. Like, that is just the Joe Flacco, the late era Joe Flacco, the devil may care Joe Flacco. Like, those interceptions will kill you. And yet, like, the Colts signed that deal with the devil anyway rather than play Anthony Richardson. And now you've got Chris Ballard, their general manager, saying that it's going to be an open competition. Like, that's just, talk about a vote of no confidence for your young quarterback. I don't want that. Like, I want them to be committed to Anthony Richardson. And, you know, if he's a train wreck this year and they had to pull the plug at midseason, fine. But I would love to see more confidence in him going into the season. So it's hard to rank Anthony Richardson in the top 20, even though there's top 10, top 5 dynasty potential if he eventually does figure it out as a passer, because we know what he can offer as a runner. And the arm talent is there too.
Do you have so they're QB 23 and QB 24 in this chart. You said you have Bryce Young ahead. Do you have Bryce Young higher than this range, or is it that you have Anthony Richardson lower than this range?
Yeah, I've got Young at 18. I mean, the Panthers seem very committed to moving forward with him. And Dave Canales, we saw him start to work his magic on Bryce Young, who down the stretch looked pretty good.
We're going kind of all out of order here anyways because we start with running back. So I'm going to jump to the tight ends. Just because that always goes like a little more quickly. We talked about them on a recent episode with Bogman, but just in terms of how they're valued on the chart, obviously, again, Brock Bowers, he's at 61 numerically. Trey McBride at 58. Truthfully, that gap's not wide enough, I don't think. Sam Laporte is third, down at 51. I just think Bowers is so – and I love McBride, but Bowers is so clearly tight end 1 that I think that should be higher. But, again, nobody's confused by those. Those are not surprising rankings. The rookies here, Tyler Warren is tight end 5. He's just a hair numerically behind George Kittle, and he's just barely ahead of TJ Hawkinson. And then just behind TJ Hawkinson at tight end 7 is Colston Loveland. Then you get a little bit of a gap before you get into Tucker Kraft, Mark Andrews, Duncan Cade, kind of the rest going from there. But there's a very clear tight end 4 through 7, whereas tight ends 1 through 3, nobody's going to quibble with that order, I don't think. And tight ends 8 through whatever, you know, you're taking in some degree of uncertainty or, lack of a ceiling or anything like that. But those middle ones, at tight end 4 through 7, again, George Kittle, Tyler Warren, TJ Hawkinson, Colston Loveland, I think you could make a case for really any order of those 4. I know you do have Kittle 4th, but I think you could justifiably, plant your flag that those 4 could be in any order. Do you think that's a fair assessment, or do you think not only is Kittle 4 for you, but he is clearly 4 for you?
No, I do think it is a fair assessment. And I had an internal debate about whether to rank Warren ahead of Kittle or vice versa. Kittle is obviously older, but I think you know what you're getting with him, and you're going to get another at least 2 to 3 years of top drawer production. Really, the floor is awfully high with George Kittle. The only thing that can keep him from being a difference maker at tight end is injury. Whereas Tyler Warren, we don't know what we're getting. I mean, it looked awfully good at Penn State last year. He had a sensational season, but he is an older prospect. I think you could actually make a case where it would not shock me if Colston Loveland were drafted ahead of Tyler Warren this year.
I've started to come around on this.
Yeah, Loveland is 2 years younger, and I think that's no small thing for a lot of NFL teams. And while Warren did have the terrific stats last year, more than 100 catches, more than around 1,200 yards. Loveland didn't match him with stats, but then again, Loveland was playing on a Michigan team, which in 2023 ran the heck out of the ball because they were so good in their national championship season and often had these big leads. Didn't really need to throw all that much. And then this past fall, 2024, just had awful quarterbacking the entire season. So Loveland's stats were not as good, but like this dude is a baller. He is the real deal. And he's only 20 years old. Doesn't turn 21 until shortly before the draft. Whereas Warren didn't really pop statistically until he was a fifth-year senior. So I wouldn't be shocked if Loveland went higher. And right now, yes, I think a 2-point difference in value makes sense. Warren should be number one. And I think in the mind of most dynasty managers, Warren is a clear number one. I think it's actually pretty close.
Isaiah Likely is tight end 19. Cole Kmet is tight end 21. Both of those seem too low to me. And if, by the way, for anybody listening, if you can, so we can trade for guys, if they're being valued that way by your league, I think those are both excellent buy low guys right now. Which of those two, again, Likely at tight end 19, Cole Kmet at tight end 21, is more surprisingly too low in your opinion? Or do you disagree with that opinion entirely?
No, I agree with you. I think I have both guys ranked ahead of where they are on the chart. Yeah, I've got Likely at 16 and Kmet at 17. And I think you could make the case that I've got both of those guys too low. They could be ahead of...
I think they both should be in the top 15. Not in the top 10, but I think they should both be inside the top 15. It's a good rookie tight end class, but rookies often, the Brock Bowers of the world aside, take a little bit of time to adjust to the NFL. I know in the last couple of years we've had these great rookie seasons, but typically that's the way it works. So I'm not sure I'd rather have, Harold Fannin, who some of the shine has come off. Elijah Arroyo is tight end 12. Again, I like the class, but I think Likely is possibly a year away from being the tight end one. He might even be it this year, depending on how the season goes. Andrew's getting another year older for an elite quarterback who loves throwing to the tight end. And Cole Kmet, I think, is in a really interesting spot as well this season. So I think they both should be in that 13 to 15 range personally.
Yeah, I agree with you, Worm, and I think that's probably kind of a flat tier. Really, even after Mark Andrews we've got him 9th with the 9th highest value. Then it's Kincaid, who's been disappointing. Njoku's getting older. Kyle Pitts is kind of there, but Arroyo maybe getting a little too much credit on the strength of a couple of really good Senior Bowl practices. Fannin put up just dazzling numbers last year, granted against lesser competition in the MAC conference. So yeah, I think there's a good case to be made that Likely and Kmet should be ahead of those rookies and maybe ahead of some of these other veterans too. Evan Engram, who could possibly be a salary cap casualty. We might have him ranked a little too high. Jonnu Smith, who's older. So yeah, it kind of a flat tier with all these guys. And yes, you could make the case that Likely and Kmet should be more toward the top of it than toward the bottom of it.
In our wide receiver section, no changes at all to any values inside the top 9. Marvin Harrison Jr. bumped up a bit. He's now at wide receiver 10. There's definitely kind of a clump of guys here, though. Harrison, JSN, Lad McConkey, A.J. Brown are all just within one kind of numerical value of each other. So that's from wide receiver 10 to wide receiver 13. They're all kind of right there. But like I said, really not a lot of changes. Not even changes necessarily with all the rookies. Tet McMillan was valued at 57 in our chart, wide receiver 16. That's exactly where he still is. So that, some of these guys, there's not really a lot of changes. Emeka Egbuka moved up a little bit, just a couple of spots in value, but he's roughly where he was, wide receiver 28. Luther Burden, wide receiver 36. In terms of the rookies, before we get to the veterans, was there anybody that stood out to you that really should have had a drastic move? I mean, further down, you get into guys like Trey Harris, who Debro loves, who did get bumped up a lot. Jalen Knoll, same thing. Did anybody stand out to you? Jaden Higgins, also another one that you are also strongly in that camp that these guys should have gained or lost a lot of value from the combine?
Yeah, I don't think the Iowa State guys, Jalen Knoll and Jaden Higgins, for me, I think I may have had both of them just outside the top 10 at wide receiver in my rookie rankings. Now they're both squarely inside. I've got Knoll 7 and Higgins 8. They both had really strong combines. I moved up your guy, Worm. He's
Yeah.
probably a third-round pick. Ty Felton
go.
of Maryland. Like
You were texting me during the combine. Yeah.
Oh man, he just tested like a champ, and it wasn't really his speed that popped to me when I watched him on tape. It was his ball tracking ability and how tough he was for kind of a thin, slightly built wide receiver. He's not quite like Devontae Smith skinny, but he's close to that. And like Felton doesn't mind the rough stuff for a skinnier dude, and then seeing him test so well at the combine. Like I've got him at wide receiver 13 in this group, and like I would say do not sleep on Ty Felton. Like it's not a great wide receiver class, but Felton is one of those guys who has emerged to maybe bolster the depth of this class.
He's wide receiver 87 on this chart, which is hogwash, I have to say. He's a good player. Like, listen, I said it jokingly in our first Dynasty Rookie episode on this feed. I've brought it up a couple other times. I know you agree to a degree. He's a good player. And I think the ranking is a little bit low, even if the ceiling isn't, a guy who's going to totally reshape your Dynasty roster. I think he's a good player, and he's valued too low. Who for you, because I believe you have Egbuka as wide receiver 2 in the class, who is wide receiver 3 for you? Is it Burden? Is it Matthew Golden, who has risen a lot in this value? Is it a guy like Harris? Who's 3, assuming that 1 and 2 are McMillan and Egbuka, and obviously setting aside Travis Hunter, given the positional question?
I've reluctantly pushed Matthew Golden ahead of Luther Burden. I still really like Luther Burden, but Golden now is pretty much a consensus first-round pick in the mock drafts of a lot of the smart people, the insider-type people. And I know that in the last round of mock drafts done by Daniel Jeremiah, Mel Kiper Jr., and Todd McShay, none of them had Luther Burden in the first round. So Burden seems to be falling out of the first round in all likelihood. I still wouldn't be shocked if he wound up there, but now it seems like a 90% likelihood that Golden is drafted ahead of Burden.
By far the biggest mover in this chart at wide receiver who is not a rookie is Ricky Pearsall. And obviously it makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
With Deebo Samuel not in San Francisco anymore, this is kind of the opportunity a lot of us were waiting for. If you drafted him with like an early second-round pick in rookie drafts last year, a real opportunity to see a big league forward, honestly. It would not stun me if after this season this current valuation looks very low. He's in a huge clump of players who we have valued at 48 in our chart, which is a tie with Jerry Jeudy, Terry McLaurin, Emeka Egbuka, Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, and Jalen Waddle are all valued at 48 as well. So that's the wide receiver 25 to the wide receiver 31 group of players. Ricky Pearsall is now in that group, though. For you, is that A, the right group of names for him to be included with? Is it B, the right kind of numerical range for him to be in, kind of that high-end wide receiver 3 in Dynasty? And C, is he somebody that you would rather be selling high with some of the excitement of his newfound opportunity, or buying high and saying, I know people are excited about him, but I would still want to get him on my roster?
I think he's in roughly the right spot. I've got him a little lower in my Dynasty rankings, wide receiver 33, but I think he's in the right tier. I've actually got Pearsall sandwiched in between 2 rookies, right in between Matthew Golden and Luther Burden. But I do have him a couple spots behind Terry McLaurin, a few spots behind Jerry Jeudy. I've still got him behind Tyreek Hill, whose career obviously is winding down, but could potentially still be a big producer for a couple more years. It's just, he looked great in those last 2 games of the season. Over 200 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, looked fantastic. And now the Deebo trade makes it clears the way and makes a pretty clear 3 wide out rotation or group. When the 49ers have 3 wide on the field, it's going to be Pearsall, Ayuk, and Juwan Jennings. But then again, the 49ers don't always play 3 wide receiver as much as some other teams, because they do like to use a fullback. And I don't want to over project Pearsall based on those 2 great games at the end of the season, even though he was a first round pick, granted a late first rounder, but he was a first rounder, and he did look good in his sort of limited audition at the end of the season. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I do think this is the right spot for him. I understand why dynasty managers would be excited to either have him or maybe try to acquire him.
Last question on this position before we move off the chart and start answering questions from the Discord audience. Just on Tet McMillan, I feel like, especially in recent years, obviously, it's pretty common for the top receiver in the class, which McMillan generally consensus is, again, assuming that Travis Hunter isn't playing that position full time, that player is typically inside the top 12 of the position. Like it seems that we very regularly are having the top rookie kind of come in with a higher ranking than wide receiver 16. So assuming you are kind of remembering the last couple of years the same way I am, do you think that the difference this year is that the top of the position in terms of the veterans is just stronger than it has been in recent years? Or is that a reflection of McMillan being a step down from some of the guys in recent years? And I don't just mean like Marvin Harrison Jr., because obviously like he came in as like, considered this generational prospect. But in general, it feels like the top guy is often coming in maybe a little bit higher than McMillan is coming in at in this chart.
Sure. Combination of those two factors, Worm. I mean, because when you look at it, look how strong the wide receiver rookie class was last year. Well, we've got 4 rookies from last year's class ranked ahead of Tet. The 2 LSU guys, Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, Marvin Harrison Jr. Actually, check that, 5, Roma Dunze as well. So, and I think that's warranted. And guys who sort of surged a little bit last year, Jordan Addison, or do we have Addison ahead of McMillan? Sorry. I
believe Addison is not ahead, at least in our chart.
He's behind. I've actually got Addison ahead of McMillan. So yes, you're correct. In most years, the number 1 wide receiver would be higher than 19 overall. But yeah, it's just not a great wide receiver class. And I think Tet is a pretty high floor prospect, but ultimately, I don't know if he's going to be a better player than Drake London. I think they're comparable in terms of what they are as prospects. I felt a little bit better about London coming out than I do about Tet.
I want to remind everybody that you can evaluate trades with confidence using FantasyPros Trade Analyzer. Instantly see the impact of trades on your team and get expert recommendations. Whether you're making a 2-for-1 deal or swapping a couple draft picks for that stud who will help you win now, the Trade Analyzer will help you optimize your roster and make smarter decisions. Try the Trade Analyzer today at fantasypros.com/myplaybook and dominate your league. All right, we'll wrap up there. We do this every single month. We've got a couple of these every month, actually. Just a reminder for everybody who isn't listening on Discord that you can join our Discord community, chat with other fans, and get access to exclusive AMAs that wind up on our podcast feed. Our schedule looks like this: myself and Fitz at 5 Eastern on the first Tuesday of each month, and then Fitz and Bogman at 5 Eastern on the third Tuesday of each month. Come get your questions answered and be on the show at fantasypros.com/chat. We'll get out of there on that. For Fitz, I'm Ryan Wormeli. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will see you again next time.